Hello, hello. This is the first video notes for the climate change unit. We took some notes in class on the board about human-made and natural causes for the greenhouse effect, and this is going to be more about what is happening to the Earth because of climate change and what is happening to people because of what's happening on Earth because of climate change. So here we go. We'll try to keep upbeat even though the world's ending. So the first theme, I guess you could say, is changes in the hydrosphere, which I took from the curriculum because they like using fancy words like that, and I don't like it, but they might do it. So hydrosphere means where there's water. So we're just talking about ice and like it melting and turning into water. So we'll talk about the Arctic mostly, but the Antarctic is also having problems with huge chunks of ice breaking off and glaciers just melting little by little each year. But the Arctic around the North Pole is where you can see the most damage the clearest. So the Arctic ice is above seawater, so it is more, I don't know, like temperamental or fragile compared to the Antarctic ice. And the temperature has been increasing in the Arctic faster than the rest of the world, about 3 degrees in the last 100 years, whereas the rest of the world has heated up about 1 degree Celsius every year. It is good to use Celsius numbers when talking about climate change because a lot of the agreements are done in Europe and with the UN, and they use Celsius. So sorry about that. Lucky for us, ice melts at 0 Celsius, so it's pretty straightforward. So the impacts of this, like with all this ice turning into water, the most obvious is just that water will make the sea rise. And so we saw before break that could inundate certain islands and flood people out of where they're living and has caused people to migrate already. It's also true that warmer water takes up more space than colder water. And so not only is there more water in the ocean, but that water is swollen, I guess you could say. In some of the parts of the Arctic where this ice has been around for decades, if not hundreds of years, there could be frozen pockets of methane that are in the ice, and so when that melts, that methane comes out. And again, methane is a really dangerous greenhouse gas, so that's a positive feedback thing. As it's releasing more methane, it's warming the Earth, which is melting the ice, which is releasing more methane. Albedo is going down, it's melting more ice, and it keeps going. Wave formations will increase, wetter summers in Europe, more extreme Atlantic weather, extinction of Arctic animals, especially the polar bear. The polar bear is probably doomed at this point, I'm sad to say, because it requires the ice to move around and hibernate and to attract seals so that they can eat, and all those things are going to be affected by the ice melting. So there's also a lot of ice on glaciers. Glaciers are gigantic chunks of ice that are like slow-moving rivers of ice that slowly slide across land. So you see the mountain. Well, this down here is the glacier part where it's like frozen solid, but you can see that's like in waves. So it is moving. So glaciers are a source of fresh water and is like one of the ways that river systems around the world start. So for example, in the Himalayas is responsible for the headwaters for 3 major rivers, the Ganges, the Yangtze, and the Mekong rivers. And those rivers serve about 1 billion people on Earth. And so when you have that ice melting and it doesn't come back, then that is a problem for those river systems. They don't get as strong of a start and the water level will drop over time. Another interaction between carbon dioxide and the ocean is that the ocean is a gigantic carbon sink. Carbon sink sounds like a bad word, but it's actually kind of a good thing because a carbon sink is somewhere where carbon can get stored in the atmosphere, or it like is able to be kept somewhere so it's not feeding more global warming. So carbon, a lot of carbon gets stored in the ocean. The ocean holds about 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere. But as the atmospheric carbon has gone up, so has the carbon in the ocean. And so 20% of our increase in carbon is fed into the ocean. When more carbon goes into the ocean, it becomes carbonic acid and makes the ocean more acidic. And even though the pH difference is only like 0.1, that's still enough to cause detrimental effects, especially to coral. So I'm going to show you some dying coral on the next slide. You can see some living coral and all the tropical loveliness that's floating around in the coral. And this is bleached coral, which has no loveliness. The bleached coral is practically dead, and nothing can live there because everything's dead in that environment. Phytoplankton, which are little dudes that a lot of fish and even whales eat, those also need cooler waters to grow. And so warmer oceans, more acidic oceans are not good places for them to live. So coral bleaching. So coral needs this algae that it has a symbiotic relationship with to survive. So when the ocean changes too much, especially when it becomes acidic, they get stressed and they shoot all the algae off of them. So like, go free yourselves, live somewhere, and then both the plant and the algae die. So the coral, when it's bleached, it's not necessarily dead. It just has no source of food anymore. So it's pretty much gonna die. And this was a problem, like when I was growing up, they'd be like, oh my gosh, coral might start bleaching. We might lose some coral reefs. We've practically lost almost all of our coral reefs, the major ones at least. 93% of the Great Barrier Reef, which is the largest one on Earth and is surrounding Australia, 93% of that is bleached. So it's practically gone at this point. Changes in biomes and animal behavior. So biomes are like environmental environments. Is that a thing that I can say? It's a place where plants and animals live. So carbon can be stored in plants too. Plants are also kind of a carbon sink because plants love carbon. They feed off carbon. So plants and forests actually can grow faster if they have more carbon. But there's a kind of limit to that. And then the other issue with that is when they store more carbon and then we go and like cut down those trees and burn those forests, it's releasing all of that CO2. So that's bad news. And then there's no trees left to convert the CO2 to oxygen. So we're losing out on oxygen. So it's a double whammy when you cut down too many trees. There's a very interesting webpage here if you want more tree news. All right, animal habitats. So as the climate changes, species are going to have to adapt very quickly. So species are used to adapting over the course of generations and thousands of years. And we're talking about like in 10 years, you need a new habitat. So mostly like these habitats are going to shift away from the equator as the tropics become too hot, as the temperate environment like around where we live, when that becomes too hot, like it's almost tropical, then they're going to have to move even further north to get to the temperatures they want. Or if a biome is like a mountain range, they're going to have to move up the mountain range where it's colder to survive. But there's a limit to that. There might be obstacles like oceans, rivers, lakes, the tops of mountains that will limit how far animals can go. It is estimated that with a 2 degree Celsius rise, we'll lose 40% of our wildlife species. And it's still slightly debated, but we're pretty much in a 6th major extinction event. This is the first that's caused by humans. But a ridiculous amount of animals are becoming extinct. In the like slightly cool category, there's another set of amazing maps. I'm going to actually show you one because they're that cool. But here's one of the maps, and it shows migration patterns of animals that might happen because of climate change. Like, how neat is that? So there's a couple of these maps, so you can like go through and like see where animals will move. So have fun with that. Changes to agriculture. So humans are animals too. So we talked a little bit before the break about how some crops will shift to other places. So like Canada and Europe will actually grow more food because those places should warm up and there should be more carbon to feed these plants. But in general, most of the world is going to lose out on food. So estimates are that with a 3-degree change, crops could lower by about a third in Africa and the Middle East, which are areas where we already see chronic hunger and where there's already cases of famine and conflict. And so the fact that they are going to have even less food is kind of a disaster. About 500 million people will most likely suffer chronic hunger, more than now. With agriculture, like there'll also be a stress on water resources in general because of lack of rainfall, lack of glacier ice, like I mentioned before, salt water intrusion as oceans rise, more evaporation because of extra heat. Like we're going to have a drier planet. And so water is going to be a prime resource, and water is going to be stressed to the point where people won't be able to use it for irrigation as much as we've been used to. So a lot of scientists are working on ways to do like vertical planting, where you can have water like drip down the plant and be used up before it gets like into the soil itself, or growing plants with a tiny bit of water, or like in different greenhouse environments, because we're going to have to figure out a way to pretty much grow plants without much water. Sorry, there's a lot on this slide. It just was so many things to talk about. So other effects on people. Not only will we be able to grow less food in places where people are poorest, but it'll also have a detrimental effect on health and safety. So weather is going to change drastically because of changes in climate. So we've already seen more powerful hurricanes, more powerful typhoons, which are really just hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean. There's just more energy in the atmosphere because of the changes in climate, and more moisture over the ocean also means that there's more water feeding into these larger and larger storms. On land, we'll have reduced rainfall and permafrost, like I said before, so there will probably be water shortages. Estimates are that 4 billion people, more than half the people on Earth, will suffer from water shortages with a 2-degree increase. I'd be shocked if we don't have a 2-degree increase with how terrible we're taking care of our planet. So that's just unbearable, that half people in the world won't be able to get water. Floods and droughts will become a problem. Floods near ocean environments, droughts in places that are already stressed from lack of water or overplanting. The UNHCR, which is the UN High Commission for Refugees, it's the UN group that takes care of refugees. They have another interesting webpage that's here, where they have stories and pictures of people who had to move because of climate change and because of environmental stresses. This is becoming more and more of a common issue. It used to be that refugees were mostly because of political wars and things like that, but we have tens of millions, maybe soon hundreds of millions of people that are going to have to move because they can't survive in their human biome, their environment. They can't grow food, they can't get water. And so where are they going to go? So this is a little bit of a review. There are some positives that I should mention. They kind of seem petty compared to the dangers, but there's always a positive and a negative to everything. So positives, there is that new sea route that you can go now north of Canada to through the Arctic to get to the Pacific Ocean. So that's good if you like selling things to China, I guess. So there's that as like an extra bonus pathway across the Earth. Some tourism destinations will see increased popularity because the weather will not get too cold for people to go on these adventures anymore. I imagine there'll be other places that dry out or disappear, like the Maldives, but some places will see a benefit. And northern latitudes will see higher crop yields, like I said, Canada and Europe. And that's about all I can come up with as positives. Other negatives, so with the warmer, possibly wetter areas that used to be cool and temperate and not as humid, we'll see an extension of mosquito habitats. We've already seen mosquitoes that naturally live in South America show up in Florida in the last couple of years and spread the Zika virus there. Like these viruses used to be tropical only, and so now we're seeing Zika, dengue fever, malaria, and a bunch of other diseases spread farther than they have in the past. We're going to talk about those diseases in the Food and Health unit. Just know they're bad. You can look up pictures if you want to see nastiness, but they're just bad. I mentioned negatives of islands disappearing and people having to leave their homes. General migration of people from environments either as refugees or just choosing to leave their environment because, I don't know, it's underwater or something. One thing we didn't talk about a lot, and is hard to predict, is like conflicts, like wars that might start due to migration, due to lack of food, due to droughts, due to a lack of water in general, or due to an extreme weather event that knocks people out of their home where they can't afford to rebuild. There's so many chances of countries going to war, not over oil or riches or like historical landmarks that they want to take back for their country, but just over the fact that they can't get water. We're going to see a number of examples of countries where like they are damming rivers and trying to keep all the water for themselves and not letting water flow into other countries. Ethiopia is just opening the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which can effectively cut off the Nile River from Sudan and Egypt. And you can imagine that Egypt is not very happy about that. And Egypt has the strongest military in that area. So what might happen? We don't know. China cuts off the Mekong River from going into Vietnam. There's endless examples of water being a source of conflict. So this is another thing that will happen because of climate change. So that was a little bit longer than I expected, but I hope that I explains what all these things are and why I put them there and why I chose those as our examples. In class, we will you'll get a chance to look at some of these deeper and maybe make an infographic or something more creative with it, because I just laid a lot of information on you. All right, see you soon.